to Shepherd Peace Counseling Ministries. I'm Nathan Clark, and here today on our questions and answers, we are going to be looking at a question that a young lady from Stockton, Missouri has sent. And the question is what is the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law? This is actually a pretty important question because this is actually a battle that goes all the way back to the days of Jesus Christ and perhaps even before that. But Jesus is one of our best examples because this was the area that he fought against the Pharisees. The Pharisees had a focus on the letter of the law, and Jesus, although he did not do away with the letter of the law, wanted to bring out to the Pharisees and to others the spirit of the law. What was the purpose behind the law? So, to make it simple, the letter of the law is simply the rigid words that describe exactly what the expectation is. The spirit of the law is the purpose behind it. So let's take an example just to look at something in our current legal system that might help us to better understand that. If I go out here to the interstate, I will find a speed limit sign as soon as I exit onto this interstate. That speed limit sign will actually have two speed limits. It'll have 70 miles an hour, and under that it'll have 45 miles per hour. This speed limit is the abbreviated version of the letter of the law in the area of the speed limit. 70 miles an hour is the maximum speed that I can travel within the letter of the law. And 45 miles per hour is the minimum speed that I can travel while on that highway. So there's the letter. That's pretty clear. But what's the spirit of the law? What is the purpose behind that law? Well, there is a purpose behind that law. Even a law as simple as a speed limit has a purpose. And that purpose is safety. A group of individuals sat down and discussed what they felt was the maximum safe speed that one could travel on this highway. And then they sat down and determined what the minimum safe speed that one could travel on this highway so that they're not ran over by the fast drivers. So 70 miles an hour on the interstate out here by where I live is the fastest that one can safely travel. We'll say on average, but that's the spirit of the law, is a safety buffer. That's where you can safely drive. And 45 miles an hour is the slowest one can drive without being a danger to others on the highway by driving too slow. Now, if I focus only on the letter of the law, then that means that if I stay within my 70 miles an hour or my 45 miles an hour, then I'm pretty much free to do whatever I want as long as I keep within that, we'll say that parameter. So if I come up upon someone who's, say, driving 30 miles an hour, they're having engine issues, and before they can exit off of the highway and get onto the shoulder, I run into them. Now, under the letter of the law, I've done nothing wrong. I was driving within the speed limits. So hitting them is not my fault. Would we agree with that? Of course not. But that's what happens when we take God's law and we take the letter of it and we dissect it, and that becomes the only focus that matters. Is that we lose the purpose behind it. And when we separate out the letter from the purpose, when we separate out the letter from the spirit of the law, the reasons behind it, we can actually violate the law. So what we'll see is by holding to the letter of the law, by staying within 70 miles an hour and 45 miles an hour, I actually became dangerous upon the highway. I actually caused an accident that could have easily been avoided had I just been willing to yield the letter of the law for just a moment in order to maintain the safety of the other car exiting off the highway. And that would have allowed me to keep the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law is safety. I did not maintain safety by focusing only on that speed limit, but by seeing the bigger picture. And that's what happens when we bring the letter of the law and the spirit of the law and we bring them together. Then we'll say, the bigger picture. Because if I focus only on the spirit of the law, Say I have a car that's custom built to go 100 miles an hour plus safely. Well, the spirit of the law is I just need to be able to travel on that highway safely. So does that mean that now that I have a special car, a car that can travel safely at higher speeds, that I can go ahead and do away with the letter of the law and just focus on the spirit of the law, and that is drive safely? No. So you can see that we can get too focused on the spirit of it, and we can get too focused on the letter of it. But what we need to do is bring them together. It's a lot like music. Music has the melody line. If you open up a hymn book, you will see that on the pages will be multiple notes, all lined together. Within that score is the melody line. That is the letter of the law. Now, as we listen to this melody line of Amazing Grace, I want you to go ahead and listen for just a moment as I play it. We can hear that it is Amazing Grace. But it almost seems empty. It seems like it's missing something. Now I'm going to play just the harmony. See, the harmony represents the spirit of the law. It brings more purpose. It helps us to connect with the letter of the law with a greater understanding. Just a letter of the law, it serves a purpose. It is important. We can't have a song without the letter of the law. Can you imagine listening to just the harmony? You wouldn't be able to tell one song from another. But the melody tells us what we're to do, how we're to do it. But now we're going to add in, now we're going to listen to just the harmony. And we can hear that just the harmony, although it is beautiful in nature, it seems to have no purpose. It seems to be kind of just lost. It just kind of takes you any which way you want. As we saw with the man behind the car that was custom built to go at higher speed safely. See, he kind of is breaking free, able to do just kind of whatever he wants under the spirit of the law. So we have to have the letter of the law to hold the spirit of the law from going out and just doing whatever it wants. But then we need the spirit of the law to help bring life to the letter of the law. So let's listen as we listen to the harmony now. It's pretty. But again, it feels like something's missing. So when we listen to the letter of the music, and now we listen to the spirit of the music, separate, neither one really brings what is needed. It still has something missing. But now, we are going to put the two together. And as we listen, you hear how beautiful the song is. We can still hear that it is Amazing Grace, yet we can see that it has life and that it is full. That's what God wants for us in His law found here in the Bible. He wants us to bring both the letter of the law and the spirit of the law together, because by themselves, they are just less than what He had purposed. If we turn into our Bibles, we can see a story in 2 Kings. If you open up your Bible, it's 2 Kings chapter 5. There's a story of a Syrian captain who had developed leprosy. And so he had heard that there was a man in Israel that was able to do miraculous things. And this man was the prophet Elisha. So if we turn in our Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 5, we're going to jump into the middle of this story, probably, say verse 9. And what we're going to have is Nahum finally seeks out this prophet Elijah. And so here we are at verse 9. He's showing up at Elisha's doorstep. And so we read. So Nahum came with his horses and with his chariot and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. So here we see that Nahum came to Elisha with a an entourage. He didn't just come by himself, but he came and he kind of showed a little force. I don't think it was meant for intimidation, but I think it was, he came and he kind of was showing off a little bit, letting Elisha know that he wasn't just dealing with the average guy. He was dealing with a great captain of the Syrian army. But here's what Elisha did. Elisha, in verse number 10, and Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come to thee, and thou shalt be clean. Now I think Nahum was anticipating that Elisha was going to come out and meet him face to face. But that's not what happened. Elisha sends out his messenger, a servant, to deliver this information. This didn't go over very well. He wasn't very happy, but that's kind of how it is with us. God doesn't just come down and sit on the edge of our bed and say, okay, Nathan, this is what I want you to do today. This is what I want you, this is the law I want you to follow, and here's the 10 Commandments personally. It kind of comes through the messenger. And are we willing to receive God's law through the messenger? Can we be humble enough to do that? Well, Nahum struggled with that. And we read further, in verse 11, it says, Nahum was wroth, and went away and said, Behold, I thought he would surely come out to me, and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and strike his hands over the place, and recover the leper. See, Nahum had a expectation. He already worked out, we can clearly see here in verse 11, he worked out in his mind exactly what he thought was going to happen. And he was looking for some great thing. That's kind of how we are. We're kind of thinking that God talks about all these blessings. That's what Nahum was seeking here, a blessing. Because he talked about these blessings and these promises, and it's going to be some supernatural experience. Oh, my healing's going to come just like this. He's going to come out, and he's going to call upon God, and the clouds are going to part, and all this miraculous stuff's going to happen, and I'm going to watch my leper be removed. See, that was the plan he had in his head. It didn't go like that. But a lot of the blessings that we could have in our lives, and perhaps we were missing out on, because we're unwilling to simply just take, we'll say, the road that just doesn't make much sense. And that's where Nahum's at. In fact, he goes on to say in verse 12, he says, Why the Jordan River? Are not the rivers in Damascus much better and more beautiful and cleaner than these nasty Israel rivers? The Jordan's just a big muddy thing. How is that? It doesn't make sense to him. So Nahum leaves and decides he's not going to do it. But finally his servant kind of convinces him. He even says something. He says, My father, if we go to verse 13, we jump in there and said, And his servant came near, and spake unto him, and said, My father, if the prophet had bid thee do something great thing, wouldest thou not have done it? How much rather then, when he saith to thee, Wash and be clean? So his servant, pretty smart individual. He said, had Elisha given you something difficult, something elaborate, you would have done it. But because he gave you something so simple as to go wash yourself in a muddy river 7 times, you decide you're not going to do it. And a lot of times that's where our blessings are held up at. Is that God lays out in this book a way to get blessings. But it's in following some laws that may not make sense. We can have the blessing of health by following laws such as the food laws. And there's many other laws that actually have benefits, automatic benefits that come with it, if we're only willing to keep them. Yes, it goes against the world, and that's what gets us in trouble. We're saying, well, the world doesn't do that. In fact, many can say now that, well, the mainstream church doesn't do that. I don't want to be different. Do you imagine how Nahum probably felt like he looked out there in that river, rinsing himself 7 times? He probably felt a little embarrassed. Maybe he felt a lot embarrassed. But if we don't follow the law, as we're going to see here in this story, we don't receive the blessing. So the letter of the law that has been given to Nahum is simply this: go wash yourself in the Jordan River 7 times. Not just any river, See, we tend to do that with the law too. We tend to say, oh, okay, well, God said this river, but we could go and do it in any river. Kind of like the Sabbath day. Well, He gave us a Sabbath day, but we don't have to keep it on the Sabbath. We can go and keep it on another day. So could Nahum just go to any river he wanted to keep this law? Of course not. He had to do it in the Jordan River. But the letter of the law here is as simple. Wash yourself. The letter of the Sabbath law. Keep the Sabbath day. Not a Sabbath day, but the Sabbath day. You check me out and see if I'm wrong. But the Bible always reads with that little word in front of it, the, Pacific. Not in general, but Pacific day. So Nahum goes, his servant convinces him that you need to go and wash yourself. So we read in verse number 14, then went he down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the sayings of the man of God, the letter of the law. And his flesh came out again like unto the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Now the spirit of the law here was obedience. It was pretty simple. Did God need to use the Jordan River? Was he restrained to the Jordan River? No. Was he restrained to the dipping of 7 times? Can God not operate with a single dip? Can God not operate with a tub of water? Of course he could. But see, the letter of the law was laid out for the purpose of obedience. That was the spirit of the law. But when we bring the two together, then we see Nahum is healed. In fact, it says his skin was like flesh of a little child. It was like brand new skin. It's better than my skin. It's new. It's like childlike. It's full of youth. And he was clean. But Nahum got the blessing he was seeking. But had he abandoned the law, had he abandoned what was told him, he would not receive that blessing. So in the story, we can see how the letter of the law and the spirit of the law were both present for him to be able to receive the ultimate blessing that he was seeking. Now, Jesus gives us the spirit of God's law. We'll say the Mosaic law. And the Mosaic law can pretty well be summed up into 10 simple commandments, found in Exodus chapter 20, if you'd like to look that up on your own. And then we have many statutes and judgments, which, in my personal opinion, connect back to the original 10 commandments. The 10 commandments is basically, we'll say, the letter of the law. And then we have the statutes that come off of the 10 commandments, and they take that law and they show us how we can keep it. But the spirit behind all of God's law is summed up in these words found in Matthew chapter 22, beginning at verse number 37. Now we're jumping into a story where the Pharisees, because see, the Pharisees were always out to prove that Jesus was somehow breaking the law. And Jesus was always trying to bring them back into balance. Now, part of the reason why the Pharisees were so hard on Jesus is the Pharisees were keeping a law that wasn't necessarily always biblical. Some of the laws they were keeping were made up by them. It was man-made laws that they kind of written into and kind of added to God's law. So they wasn't always quoting God's law. But they were focused on the law. They were that person that was driving on the highway that is not going to yield his speed because he's not going under 45 miles an hour. That's the law. I cannot break it. But see, all that focus on that can be a distraction. It can actually cause us to hurt the spirit of the law in such a way that we do not actually keep the law appropriately. But here we have a story where the Pharisees are chastising Jesus, or they're trying to catch Jesus. And so they ask him a question. They ask him, what is the best law of all? What's the greatest law of all? And Jesus answers them and says, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. So the greatest law of all is to love God with everything that we are. But he didn't stop there. He went on. Verse number 38. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. So Jesus is saying, at this point right now, we're about to sum this whole thing together. But right now, the Pharisees are thinking, okay, Jesus has got these two laws. Two special laws. They may even be thinking, oh, Jesus has got two new laws, and all the other laws are done away with. I've heard that one too. But what's happening is Jesus is simply quoting the Old Testament. When it says, thou shalt love God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, you can go to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, and you will find that. He's just quoting the Old Testament. And then, of course, for the second one, Leviticus 19:18 will take you to the verse that talks about loving your neighbor as thyself. Now, here's what's important. So far, we've got two aspects of the law. Love God, love your neighbor. Now let's see what he says here at the end. Verse number 40. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Jesus just described the spirit of the law. He says all the Old Testament laws all have this spirit behind it. This is the purpose behind the Ten Commandments. The first table of the Ten Commandments is horizontal or vertical commandments between you and God. The second table of the commandments is between you and man. And so God is showing you what is the spirit of the first table of the commandments. To love God. So don't tell me, oh, I love God, but I'm not willing to keep his commandments. That's what the commandments are for, to love God. The spirit of the law is to love God and to love your neighbors. It's love. When we step outside of that, then we can't keep the letter of the commandments, the letter of the law appropriately. And that's where the Pharisees had their breakdown. All they wanted to do was make sure that their neighbor wasn't making a mistake. Even if you're a somewhat of a humble person, let's say that you're not even paying attention to other people, but you're focusing on yourself. Can you truly have a good Sabbath day if you're constantly watching and wondering what you're doing wrong? Oh, did I do that wrong? Oh, did I do that wrong? I have a refrigerator in my kitchen, believe this or not, that came with a Sabbath mode. Now, I don't use it, of course, but it came with the Sabbath mode. And it came with the Sabbath mode because there are people out there today that are so worried about that refrigerator using up electricity on the Sabbath day that they have to go and buy a refrigerator that automatically shuts off. Can you imagine being so focused on what mistakes I can make that I lose the purpose behind the Sabbath? The purpose behind the Sabbath, we'll say the spirit of the Sabbath law is to love God, to worship and fellowship with God on his day. And if I'm constantly worried how many steps I'm taking, if I'm constantly worried how much work am I doing, how much calories I'm burning, you can see that's where the Pharisees were. They broke it down to where you had to do everything just right, or you were just a horrible person. Now, that doesn't mean that we can do away with the letter of the law. The law says that we are to keep a Sabbath day. The law mentions many other laws. We're to do that. We can't violate, we'll say on a regular basis, the letter of the law. But like the driver on the highway, there are these, we'll say, circumstances that we cannot foresee that will happen to where I need to slow down and uphold the spirit of the law. So that by running into him, I break the law. By not running into him, I break the law. But if I'm in a situation to where a law has to be broke, do I want to break the spirit of the law or do I want to break the letter of the law? Well, preferably you don't want to break either one. But it's far better to slow down to 30 miles per hour and uphold the spirit of the law than it is to run into that person and cause injury or death, just uphold the letter of the law. And we see that Jesus gives us an example of how this works in Matthew chapter 12, verse 11. And again, he's battling this out with the Pharisees, and he says unto them, what man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into the pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? Jesus was lifting up the spirit of the law. He's saying that we're not going to allow people to be harmed. We're not going to allow people to suffer simply because The letter of the law seems to say that that's what happened. We take, for example, in Exodus chapter 35, there's a verse in there, verse 3, I believe, that speaks of not kindling a fire on the Sabbath day. And I've had many good friends that have walked away from, we'll say, the letter of the law, not because kindling a fire somehow offended them, but they realized that they couldn't keep a perfect Sabbath day. Well, of course, you can't keep a perfect Sabbath day. We're imperfect people. But that doesn't mean that we throw it all out simply because we're imperfect. Doesn't mean we give up trying just because we can't do it perfect. But we can take that simple verse, that statute that gives us some information how to better love God and serve God on His Sabbath day. And we can take it way, way out of dominion. And we could read that. Literally, I could read that verse if I was to focus only on the letter of the law, and would say that basically Christians can only live in warm environments because it would be against the Sabbath laws to be able to build a fire to stay warm on the Sabbath day. But of course, that's not what that is referring to. But you can see how easy it is to get focused and to lose the greater picture. We need to have a greater understanding. We need to combine the love with the letter, because the letter by itself is unloving and can be a poor witness. And the love by itself can have no structure and seem to say that I can just do whatever I want as long as I'm doing it because I love you. As long as I can say that I still love you, then I can do whatever I want. It has no structure. But when we bring the structure with the love together, we have a law, a righteous direction in life that will guide us and help us avoid bad things. It will bring many blessings, natural blessings, and then some supernatural blessings. God wants to reward those who are obedient to Him. So there's my thoughts here today on the letter versus the spirit of the law, and I hope they were helpful to you. And may God bless you and have a wonderful afternoon.